Hello, I am Enrique Quesada, and this is the Judy Lay Allen Mexico Center podcast from the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. A couple of months ago, we published an episode with writer Francisco Cantú, who wrote about the regions along the Rio Grande where Big Bend National Park on the U.S. side and the protected areas of Santa Elena and Maderas del Carmen on the Mexican side sit. Today, we have with us the people who look over these areas. In the U.S., that is Bob Krumenaker, superintendent of Big Bend National Park, and on the Mexican side, Javier Ochoa, subdirector of the protected areas Maderas del Carmen and Ocampo. In this conversation, they talked about the different models of conservation the two countries have, their day-to-day activities, and the numerous ways in which they collaborate across the border to the benefit of the ecosystem they share. Krumenaker and Ochoa have extensive careers with their respective agencies and were kind enough to share with us more about their work, collaboration, and what they think about the feasibility of a binational park. Here's my conversation with Bob Krumenaker and Javier Ochoa. I am here today joined by Bob Krumenaker, who is the superintendent at Big Bend National Park and Rio Grande Wild and Scenic River, and by Javier Ochoa Espinosa, the subdirector of the protected area Maderas del Carmen. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So I'm really excited to have both of you in the podcast this time to follow up on a previous episode that we did with writer Francisco Cantú, who told us about this kind of ever-elusive dream of a binational park that would encompass Big Bend and Maderas del Carmen. These areas basically along the Rio Grande. And in that conversation, Francisco Cantú mentioned both of you because he talked to both of you. So I'm excited about what you can tell us about these regions and the approaches of the two countries that they take and the collaboration that exists. I know you both have long careers in your work, and so I really appreciate your expertise. But to start, can you describe the region that you work in, kind of what makes it special? You know, what's the flora and fauna there?
I'm going to start with that. Thank you very much, Enrique. Bob. First, I need to describe what is CONAM. CONAM is a federal agency in Mexico. We are managing in that part of the state of Coahuila 3 protected areas, not only Maderas del Carmen. Maderas del Carmen is one, Ocampo is the second one, and Rio Grande Natural Monument is the third one. So all 3 are located in the northwest corner of the state of Coahuila. Together, those protected areas encompass more or less 600,000 hectares. One of the big differences between the protected areas in Mexico and the National Park Service in USA is that we have people living inside to the community, to the protected areas. So, I mean, I know that National Park Service also have people living there, but mostly the park rangers. It's important to say that in some cases that communities are inside to the protected area. Even in some cases, there are cities inside to the protected areas. This is not the case for that protected areas, but because of our goal is a little bit more than conservation of the land. It's also promote the social development of the communities. This is another goal of the CONAM. For such reason, some impacts for human uses are present in the land. Mainly causes for cattle raising in our cases is one of the first treaties, not the cattle. So the way the people manage the cattle. But for that, you can imagine that landscape as, Chihuahuan Desert typical. We have the same vegetation, in Big Bend and Maderas, desert scrubland, some grassland, riparian areas, even forests in the Sky Islands. In our case, we have the Maderas del Carmen Sierra and El Jardín, which is a very, very different space. It's more desert than timberland or woodland, actually. As you can imagine, we have the same wildlife species also. But because that impact for the human uses in the spaces that we are trying to protect, the habitat condition is different. It's impacted a little bit in some cases. In some cases, it's not touched for the human hand. But for example, in the case of the top forest of Maderas del Carmen, that space has been considered like a center of genetic distribution for black bears in this region. We also have the Carmen's white-tailed deer, which is an endemic for this region. And in recent years, in partnership with some private landowners, we have started to reintroduce American bison and pronghorn. So that species are very unique in this region. And so the range was historic for that species. That's the reason that we are trying to recover that species. Also, we have recognized several territories of golden eagles all across the protected area. We have, keeping tracking that monitoring for the last 10 or maybe 20 years, more better say. And we are confirming that species is a resident here in Maderas del Carmen. It's pretty much the same that Big Ben, but that thing is, so we are together, so that biological corridor is very important to conserve.
I'll step back a little bit from that great description that Javier provided. The Big Bend, Maderas del Carmen, Rio Grande, Rio Bravo area is the heart of the Chihuahuan Desert. And as Javier points out, people have lived in this area for thousands of years. And on the U.S. side, back in the 1930s, the Congress, spurred on by the state of Texas, actually established the national park over here. And it's currently about 800,000 acres. And we'll talk a lot later, I'm sure, about the difference in the conservation model between the U.S. and Mexico. But as Javier points out, there are no private residents anywhere inside Big Bend National Park. So these lands have essentially the same land use history, but since the 1930s or 1940s, the lands on the north side of the river have been able to recover a little bit more than at least some of the lands on the south. But we like to talk about the river as uniting people and uniting ecosystems, more so than dividing them. Yes, there's an international line there, but the plants and animals, they don't care about that very much. And Javier talked about the black bears. Well, thank goodness the habitat has been protected in the Maderas, because about 20, 30 years ago, black bears moved from there across the Rio to the north, and now are very healthy in the Chisos Mountains inside the Big Bend National Park. But in essence, both of these areas have, I would say in a simplistic way, three major ecosystems. This is the low Chihuahuan Desert. We have the riparian corridor, which is biologically rich in some of the best bird habitat anywhere in North America. And then on both sides, a little further from the river, we have these sky islands of mountains, which are much cooler, much wetter, and have a very different assemblage of species. And so they're not just beautiful, but they are some of the most biologically diverse lands in North America, if not the world.
Thank you for those descriptions. In the previous episode, I talked with Francisco Cantu about the different approaches to conservation that the U.S. and Mexico take, and you kind of were referencing some of those a bit. And so you are the people in charge of taking care of these regions for your particular organizations. I would love to hear what are some of the day-to-day tasks or challenges, I guess, in the conservation efforts in these areas. Of course, if you can describe the kind of work that you do for people who may not have maybe they've, I guess in the case of Big Bend, maybe they've visited, but they're not so sure what the day-to-day looks like. And we learned some of that in the previous episode, but I'd like to hear it from you.
Very interesting question. As I mentioned before, the first big difference between that two models of conservation for us is the people living inside the protected areas, I mentioned. Second one, but not the last one, is that we have not directly law enforcement's permission. This is very important to point it out because, many visitors, mainly from USA, do not understand the model for at least to those two things. Because of that, we don't see the people inside the protected areas like customers. I am not saying that they are customers. They are the owners actually in USA. Rather than they are our partners in conservation. I am talking about the communities living inside the protected area. We cannot see that they as a customers. They are our partners in conservation. So let me tell you, we are a staff of 8 persons, to manage 600,000 hectares. Our education background is different from forestry specialists, biologists, agronomists. I am an agronomist, to vets, even vets. So no one of us has a very specific social background. However, this is one of our many duties. It's one of the main activities that we do when we work with the communities, actually. The protected area offices are located just to try to figure out what's the day by day. So our offices are in Musquis, Coahuila. Musquis is a medium-sized village, more or less located 200 kilometers south of the protected area. It's a trip of about 2 hours to reach the headquarters. Headquarters is different. I'm going to talk about our headquarters. Some paper roads exist, but this condition is slowly getting better. Some paved, other unpaved roads are present. So we have 2 small facilities in the protected area. One is in the Ejido Jaboncillos. It's virtually a house we use as a field station because we are not too many people. Only 8 persons. So almost nothing. We are together in that place. Sometimes only 4 persons, only 1 person, etc. And we have another facility in Boquillas that we use as an office to attend visitors mainly. The rest of the locations inside the protected area, when we go to any work, we camp, or simply we are guests of our family. Just open the door for us for 1 night or 2 nights. And it depends the work we are making in the field. But that's part of the day by day. Also, for the last 20 years, we have hardly worked with people, encouraging them to be involved in a variety of projects for habitat conservation, restoration, wildlife monitoring, or environmental education. For such reason, part of the day today for a protected area technician is to train groups, teach, try to get the people involved in our work. We have 2 community firefighters brigades that we are training for the last maybe 15 years or something like this. Several groups of environmental promoters, maybe 19% of that groups are women. Housewives. At least 1 monitoring group. Wildlife monitoring group that they monitoring golden eagle and other kind of wildlife. All that persons are people from the communities. They are not professionals. We are trying to train that people, and this is part of our job is try to other persons make our job. Just training them obviously, and keep the eye always in the things that they are doing, because the main reason is try to focusing. In the past, I remember when I was when I started to work here as a field technician 16 years ago. I was the person in charge of all the wildlife monitoring, and I made almost everything for myself, and that was very good because I really recognize almost each centimeter of the protected area, but it doesn't work if any other person don't know that. It's better just to share to the other persons the things that you are doing. It's not the case, because if Javier once go to other protected area, so the knowledge is also coming with me. So it's better to try to pass that information for the communities. Anyway, another important task that we do is advise the people to their productive activities. For example, cattle ranching, agriculture. We usually inviting them to make it environmentally friendly, and according with the regulations, of course. Many times we are the bad guys in this story. Many times, so because sometimes we need to process with legal claims. But our role is, in a big sense, be the advisors and guides to the people throughout the legal process, even for the use of natural resources. This is part of the day by day. And it depends also. some of the people of the staff live in Musquis. Other people live outside the Musquis. Like in my case, I live in Saltillo, which is located, 5 hours south to the protected area. So for me, I spent 1 week in the office, 2 weeks in the field, and 1 week in the home office. It's not the rest, but I am moving that way. And the other technicians, they mostly spend 1 week on 1 week, or sometimes 10 days and 2 days in the office. It's variable. It's more or less the way that we work.
The model is so different. I think most of your American listeners will think they know what a U.S. national park is, and they're probably right. But what they may not understand is that the Congress has given the U.S. National Park Service primarily a conservation mission, but it is a conservation mission that has to be integrated with providing for visitor education and enjoyment. So sometimes people talk about that being a dual mission or being in balance, but actually we're supposed to do both of those things. So the conservation side is behind the scenes. Most people who come here, and last year we had almost 600,000 people, which was a huge new record. Wow. For Big Bend. Most people who come stay on paved roads. They may camp or they stay in a lodge. So it's a highly developed area, order of magnitude more so than the protected areas south, but by U.S. national park standards, actually, it's still fairly remote and undeveloped, which is why this place is so attractive. But Javier said he had 8 people. I have about 90. And it's almost embarrassing to say this.
That's a big difference.
Right. And we own the land, and we have law enforcement authority, and we have regulatory authority. And so our job is actually much, much easier than Javier's is. But I think from the very beginning of Big Bend National Park in the 1930s, forward-thinking people on both sides of the boundary said to manage only on one side of the river when the ecosystems are the same, and at that point were similarly undeveloped on both sides. There were some people that were living here, but not very many. So the vision for transboundary collaboration was here from the 1930s onward. And so we have a strong interest in the U.S. National Park Service here, getting to know Javier and his team, figuring out where can we collaborate. We have more resources, and so if there are things that we can help them achieve their goals, it also helps us achieve our goals. As I said earlier, the bears came from Mexico to here. We share the river. We share the concern about water quantity and water quality. So we do a lot of monitoring of both surface and groundwater together, and we try to do it by the same way. So we work on protocols together. Another issue that Javier mentioned peripherally was fire. And so, fire is a natural process, but fire when it impedes the safety of people or it threatens to destroy things that we care about, whether it's some natural resources that don't do well on fire, although most are adapted to it, or when it approaches communities and buildings, obviously we want to be fighting and in some cases managing that fire. So one of the great things that we do together is there is this firefighting team called the Los Diablos, which is made up of American citizens living in the villages in the protected areas in Mexico, who actually are employed by the United States government to fight fire. And so they are well trained by U.S. Fire management people, and we tap them wherever we can, but they are also, a very experienced resource for Javier and his team. And there are times like when the park was shut down for COVID, or when the government on this side was shut down, where we can do things. We're not allowed to cross the boundary, but we can go to the north side of the river, and Javier's people can go to the south side of the river, and we shake hands in the middle, and we do things at the same time on both sides of the river. And that works, and it builds friendship and collaboration and trust. And, our goal is think globally, but act locally. And so wherever we can do something that improves the quality of these ecosystems we share, that improves the living conditions of the people who live in the park or visit the park, we do that together as much as we can. It's not every day. And I will say that Javier, because of the different paradigm as well as different staffing, he's in the field. He knows his resource way better than I do. I'm mostly administering from an office and balls in the air for money and other stuff. Fortunately, there are some people who do work for Big Bend National Park who are out in the field a lot. But I think we are much more bureaucratic, frankly, than our friends to the south are. They don't have the luxury of being bureaucrats. They have to actually do work on the ground.
You have a lot of people in the park to manage. And you're also, I understand, newer to the area, I think. Yes, I think you came in 2019.
I did. I came here in 2018, but I think a story that I like to tell is in 1982, long before I ever dreamed of working at Big Bend National Park, and certainly long before I ever thought it was possible or even wanted to be a national park superintendent, I had the amazing opportunity to do a 6-day canoe trip on the lower canyons of the Rio Grande. And if someone on that river trip around the campfire had suggested what my future would be, we all would have laughed and said, there's no way that's going to happen. But my point being, my first visit to this area was 1982. And I was a young man. I fell in love with the area. And so it's true. I spent the intervening years in many, many different places, but this is a place that I was thrilled to come back to. And to be honest, the lower canyons are really, really remote on both sides of the river. There aren't a lot of people who have run those rivers. And to have the street cred to say, hey, I did that, how many years ago? 36 years before I came here as superintendent, that helped. And then amazingly enough, the second week I was here in 2018, I was on the river again. And I hate to admit it, but I haven't been back since.
So you talked a little bit about some of the collaboration that happens. Are there any other examples or places where you think more collaboration would be very beneficial to both areas?
I mean, for me, is collaboration between CONAM and National Park Service is not new. Maybe this collaboration is older than the CONAM's existence, actually. Maybe, no, I don't know the date exactly, but near to 30 years ago, there were people here in our seats making the same, like Bob and me. And they made a lot of job previous to the things that we can mention. I think one of the main excuses to work together is the thing that Bob said has been the river. It's a common space and a common responsibility. Through the years, we have received a lot of advising from several river experts from Big Bend. So without that advising, maybe we have not too much, even because also we have received a lot of beneficial, support, even in logistics, movements, the equipment, materials to work in the river. That was always helpful coming from Big Bend. Then the river trips eventually became the space to make plans for another topics. That was so that was not the intention mainly, but in the course of just go in the canoe and moving and start to talk, maybe about the English, maybe about the Spanish, no matter that. So that was the space to make a plan for the new things. So, for example, as you mentioned, Enrique, other topics like recreational uses, for example, fire training. Bob mentioned something. Just to mention a couple, but to standardize our action is almost impossible because it can result beneficial for one side or of another. But I mean, the difference of available resources is the big gap. But we find out one unique process that happens maybe 6 or 7 years ago. That was big scale and long-term monitoring. And we adopt the vital signs approach that we have in National Park Service for our long-term indicators of ecosystem health, at least in that sistership protected areas we are managing. So this is unique for Mexico. So 2 years ago, we start as a central office as mandatory to evaluate the ecosystem functionality, but we already have that homework did because we adopt that scheme of monitoring, of big scale monitoring. It was great. Thanks for that collaboration. We talked before that happens, and we select and make a very, very specific process to develop models of ecosystem health. And previously we detect what were our conservation objectives, and was a very, very useful process. This is one of the other examples. Maybe you cannot see that in the land, but for taking decision is precious. To the time, this collaboration has been beneficial for us because several other doors have opened. Other doors more open than the port of entry of Oquillas. That was one door that opened, but several others have opened. For example, the genetic flow of wildlife it's guaranteed. Recreation opportunities from USA to Mexico are present, also is beneficial. And the interchange of experience between staff is always a potential. So that's some of the things that, like a result of that collaboration. And I think so maybe continuity and communication has been the key to keep tracking this relationship. And you mentioned something about a couple of other examples of collaborations. I have to, for example, you know what is the Barbary ship, the outlet ship, Enrique? But I know that Bob knows. So this is a herbivore, it's like a sheep, like a goat. It's actually it's a invasive species that has invaded the desert range of Texas, Coahuila, and that Chihuahuan desert. And this is one of the topics that we are starting to tackle or to address because it's a transboundary problem. So we are trying to make together things about monitoring, looking for resources to try to control that species. Here in Mexico, we have some regulations about, wildlife control. It's not easy. But with the help and support and a very hard justification of that is a problem, a binational problem, we are running through to looking for options to try to control that species, but this is really a challenge. The other thing is the water flow in the river. So as Bob said, it's a common space. The water is a very precious resource and is not too much available. We are crossing that drought, and we are trying to have the same speech in the conversation about how we can ask for ecological use of water. So there is a treaty, an international treaty for waters. I am not an expert in that topic, but when that treaty was right and signed, the ecological use was never considered. Was never taken account. So today we are trying to move forward that message to try to, at least for the position of the conservation, we need to ask for water as also for wildlife. So it's very important, and I know that is a priority the human being. Absolutely there is, but without water in the habitats, so it's really a big challenge to try to conserve the river. So that's one of the two topics that I just is coming to my mind to we can increase collaboration. Well,
I'm really glad that Javier brought up the flows in the river. I will point out that what's good for ecosystems and wildlife is actually good for people too, not just because people enjoy wildlife, but the river is subject to both drought and flooding right now. And what most people may not know is that all the water that flows, not just through Rio Grande, through Big Bend National Park and Javier's protected areas, but that ultimately ends up in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, that rich, highly populated agricultural region. None of that flows from Colorado, New Mexico. All of that water comes from either the Rio Conchos, which is a Mexican tributary that comes in at Ojinaga and Presidio, and through springs. And Javier talked a lot about monitoring of springs. So groundwater is the majority of the flow at the bottom of the park, but the Rio Conchos is the majority of the flow at the upper part of these protected areas. So we have been very fortunate in the National Park Service to recently have been invited to sit at the table for a conversation that is beginning internationally between the International Boundary and Water Commission, which is made up of both the U.S. and Mexican representatives. I don't think CONAP is yet at the table, but it's certainly something that we are hoping that can happen. And so we are trying to have this conversation where we need to help the water engineers understand that these canyons are not just conduits for water to get to the Amistad Reservoir, but by managing how the water comes out of the dams on the Conchos, we hopefully can do good things for the ecosystem as well as make it less likely that the communities along the river will be subject to devastating floods. So we're just beginning those conversations. One of the other very cool things that we are looking forward to more collaboration on is these are some of the darkest skies in North America because they're so lightly populated areas. And just recently, both protected areas on the Mexican side and the U.S. side were made part of something that is called the Greater Big Bend International Dark Sky Reserve, first ever international dark sky reserve. And kind of like the CONAP model, there's no regulatory authority with that, but working with the communities to preserve the dark sky through their own lighting practices and helping people understand that, we're not talking about turning off lights and being unsafe. We're talking about controlling lighting and aiming it downward. It's something that many of the communities on the north side of the river, well beyond the park, have embraced, realizing that the rest of the world doesn't have dark skies. Tourists really like dark skies, and certainly all of us who live here do. So that's an opportunity that we look forward to working together on. Even more. So I think, as Javier said, when we get together on a specific project, usually on the river in a canoe, we don't pay close attention to where the boundaries are. And we say, well, what opportunities do we have to work together? And if we can pull it off, we do.
This kind of leads into the last question I have, which is, I wanted to ask about this idea of a binational park that I talked to Francisco Cantu about. And I know that talking about the subject of the relationship between the two countries, especially cross-border collaboration, it can be a touchy subject for many reasons, especially perhaps in recent years. But I'm curious to know, if you were aware about this idea, like when did you become aware that this plan had existed or had some traction, I guess, at some point, however minor, and just what are your thoughts about this binational park?
Javier, if I can go first on this one. When the U.S. National Park was first being formed, none of the protected areas in Mexico had been established yet. So the conversation started, at least in any official government way, on the U.S. side. But from the beginning, as I said earlier, there were forward-thinking Mexican scientists and conservationists that were part of some of those teams. So from the 1930s onward, the idea of an international protected area, and probably at the time they were using the term international park, was being discussed. And again, from the beginning, the U.S. National Park Service, my agency, has been in support of this, transboundary conservation in whatever model it may have. But I will say in the U.S., people have a very specific idea of what a national park is. And, Big Bend is lightly visited, but Yellowstone and Grand Canyon and Yosemite, for the most part, the word park to people means a very tightly managed area that is protected, yes, but it's very much about tourism and roads and hotels and, in urban areas, green grass and sometimes, tennis courts and soccer fields. And so even in the U.S., the concept of a national park, we sometimes struggle helping our visitors understand this is not the same as your local town park in terms of what our goals are as well as what the rules are. And then just to make this interesting, I don't remember the exact year, but on the northern U.S. boundary, Canada established Waterton Lakes National Park adjacent to Glacier National Park. And that is a very successful model. But Canada is way more like the United States in terms of culture and government rules than Mexico is. And so people in the U.S. have this model that why can't we have a Waterton Glacier model where, at least prior to 9/11, moving across the border was really easy, and there's almost as much development and tourist facilities on the Canadian side as there is on the U.S. side. And what I try to gently tell people is that's never going to happen. The model that Javier has described and can go into more depth on, it's just different. It's not better, it's not worse, it's different. The Mexican government does not own the land, it does not have regulatory authority, and that's not going to change. And in Mexico, a national park is a very different thing, and Javier knows way more about this than I do, but there are a few national parks. They tend to be near urban areas like Mexico City, and they may look a little bit more like U.S. urban or semi-urban national parks. But that's not what CONAP is protecting just in this area. These are areas for the protection of flora and fauna, which in the Mexican model is actually a higher level of protection. It's just less tourism oriented. So I think one of our challenges, Javier mentioned it briefly, is to help our Mexican friends however we can, however they ask, to develop the right amount of ecotourism, but it's never going to be at the level that it is in the U.S. And because of all the international issues that we're not going to talk about, it's not likely that transboundary travel is going to be as easy across the Mexican border, for the foreseeable future as it is across the Canadian border. So I think we are absolutely committed in trying to get the U.S. conservationists to understand transboundary conservation, transboundary protected areas, yes. Transboundary national park, probably not.
Thanks, Rob. I agree almost completely with both point of view, because if we go to the past and just check it out, the proposal of that, talking about Mexican side, we have 3 or 4 decrees of different protected areas. I mentioned three, but also we have Cañón de Santa Elena in the Chihuahuan portion of that corridor. So in the very beginnings, as I am not trying to repeat Bob's speech, but actually that was the reason to put together all that piece of land to try to protect a very significant portion of Chihuahuan desert. And that was the feeling of trying to protect no matter if you can visit or not the place. Visitation is also a very important part, actually, for the communities in the border of the protected area, but it's not the only one. And being realistic, this model of conservation, so as you mentioned, is not recognized in the Mexican law. So we have categories, and we are very specific in that kind of the things that the categories are trying to address for each protected area. And actually we have that sistership agreement that works pretty good. Actually, the only things we need is keep fairly working.
There's one thing I will add, which is there is an opportunity that I think there may be in our future. There is a biosphere reserve established on either side of the border. The Big Bend Biosphere Reserve on our side and the Maderas del Carmen on the other side. And these are also not regulatory things, but they are officially recognized areas of conservation as well as sustainable development around them. Right now, I would say we don't actively manage the Biosphere Reserve any differently than the rest of the national park. We don't really take advantage of the sustainable development things that might be outside the boundary of the U.S. National Park. But the Biosphere Reserve on our side ends at the river. The Biosphere Reserve on Javier's side ends at the river. They touch one another. And so there's some conversation, and this would be more symbolic than anything else, but instead of having 2 Biosphere Reserves that touch one another, one American and one Mexican, maybe it would be possible to have one Biosphere Reserve with the same boundaries that is partially in the United States and partially in Mexico. And so I think that's a baby step. There's still a big bureaucracy. We would have to convince that that's a good idea. But that would be one of the things that we can do that I think would make it clear to people that, we may not ever have this binational national park, but we do have binational conservation.
Javier Ochoa, subdirector for the protected area of Maderas and Carmen, and Bob Krumenaker, superintendent for Big Bend National Park. I want to thank you again for this wonderful conversation, for answering my questions, and just giving us a better understanding of the important work that you do. And it's just a pleasure to hear you describe this work.
Thank you, Enrique. Good to see you again, Javier.
Muchas gracias, Bob, Enrique. Un gusto estar aquí.
That was Bob Krumenaker and Javier Ochoa. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the Judy Leal Mexico Center podcast. Thanks to Lisa Huaqueta, our program manager, and to Tony Payan, the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Special thanks to Judy Leal for her generous support of the work we do at the center. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico, where you can find our latest publications. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host and do not necessarily reflect those of the center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at usmexicocenter@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Center is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Radio Public, and Spotify. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. I'm Enrique Quesada. I will see you next time.